how this sermon came about was I attended a funeral a few months ago now of one of my best friends' mothers died. She committed suicide. And I went to him during the funeral, and I naturally wanted to ask him about his teaching of salvation, what he taught there at that church, knowing that this woman that I loved and cared about attended that church under his preaching. So I pinned him down on that regeneration, and we went back and forth for a little while. And come to find out, he's a Calvinist, and he told me to my face. He said, because we got into it a little bit in there, and he got riled up with me, angry with me, in the funeral. And he's like, "Why are you doing this? Why are you coming to me with this? Why are you talking to me like this? This is a funeral. People are mourning here." And I said, "I'm concerned because what it sounds like is that you're teaching Calvinism. That's a big deal. That's damnable heresy." Of course.
Hello, Jeff Dollar here. I'd like to take a few moments to respond to this video. This is not going to be a theological dissertation. We're not going to attempt to answer any arguments. All of these arguments which have been given in this sermon are the standard arguments against Calvinism, so you can see that in other videos. What I'd like to focus on here is the complete lack of propriety exhibited by some fundamentalist preachers. I don't know who this particular preacher is. I could not find his name. I think that he is somewhere from Louisiana, close enough to get involved with the Clifton Baptist Church, knowing people there. So it's somewhere down in Louisiana. He's connected somehow with Pastor Joe Major of the new IFB. This sermon was streamed live on his channel back in February 2nd of 2020. It wasn't that long ago. I came across this, and I saw at the very beginning in the opening of his message, he talks about going to a funeral conducted by another pastor who happened to be a Calvinist, and he takes it upon himself to confront this man over his Calvinism at the funeral. And apparently it made enough of a disruption that the pastor had to say, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this here? This is not the appropriate place," and it wasn't. But what I wanted to show was just the attitude of this particular branch of fundamentalism. Now, you could disagree with Calvinism or agree. At this point, it doesn't matter, or any other theological issue. But to take that disagreement to a funeral home and to make a public display of it, I think this just shows the lack of propriety. I do hope to be able to get in contact with this particular pastor. I'd like to interview this pastor. Have made some effort to contact him. If we are able to get in contact with him, I'd like to make maybe a separate video on this incident, just so he can give his side of the story, maybe give some clarity of it. Funerals are a place where people are mourning. You're there to comfort the mourning to a degree, but whenever I do a funeral as a Calvinistic pastor, I'm going there understanding that many of the people who are there have no exposure to the gospel at all, no exposure to the Lord Jesus Christ. So when I go to these places and I'm invited to a funeral, to conduct a funeral of even unsaved people, my purpose there is to give them a taste of the gospel of Christ. I don't expect to go in and to conduct a revival meeting. I go in trying to explain to them the concept of death, trying to explain the concept of grace, the concept of redemption. All these things, I've got 20 minutes, sometimes maybe even less, to give them a taste of the truth. So I don't expect to go in giving great theological dissertations or evangelistic meetings. I go in expecting to use this as an opportunity to get the gospel to some people who have not heard. Now, at the same time, I'm there to comfort the grieving. Sometimes there might be one or two Christians there who are responsible for inviting me, and the majority of the people are going to be unsaved people. So then I have to use caution. I have to be judicious in what I say. You don't go to a funeral and say that person's in hell, because really we don't know. We don't know what happens in the last minutes of death. As the example of the thief on the cross, if you would have known that man prior to his crucifixion, you would have said that man's going to hell. But when you see him as shown in the Gospels, where he changes on the cross, he then recognizes Christ for who he is and asks the Lord to remember him. Jesus says, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." We know that man is in heaven, though no one would have guessed that prior. So we use that as an example. We don't know what happens on the deathbed of these people. So when we're coming to do a funeral like that, we use caution. Now, here we have a lady that apparently committed suicide. So how do you deal with that? Well, it's the same thing. We don't know. So and this lady apparently had been affected by the gospel. She had some connections to it, but at the same time, this preacher decides he's going to go in and cause this stir. But what I'd like to really point out is the lack of propriety in the movement as a whole. In whatever situation of life, whether it be funerals, whether it be public gatherings, we find that there is a lack of civility. And to actually to do a disruption such as this is looked at as being something noble. I'm doing the right thing. I'm speaking up. I'm confronting this man. Whereas this particular preacher is just showing his complete and utter ignorance of theology. I mean, what it's done is this particular group, they alone have the truth. I mean, that you go, as I've mentioned before, you go to the fundamentalists, the early fundamentalists. Many of them were Calvinists, and they put together the fundamentals, from which came the fundamentalist movement, the IFB, the Independent Fundamental Baptists. So there were Calvinists involved there. There were Calvinists involved in the putting together of the King James Bible. There were Calvinists involved in the bringing together of this country. Many Calvinists came from across the oceans and established this country. So there was a great Calvinistic influence. So to say that all these people are going to hell because they preach Calvinism is just a total lack of historical knowledge, theological knowledge, and it shows that the cultish nature of this group. So when you get these people, and this actually brings back memories. I remember at Hyles-Anderson College, occasionally you'll have people like this will go and do some rather crazy things and publicly to either try to preach the gospel somewhere, to go soul winning somewhere. I remember going into a veterans home to do a Bible study. We weren't welcome there. There was no permission to go there. We just snuck in, and we began teaching. We go to two different rooms and we'd have Bible studies. Okay, I think the garbage man's here. So that was looked at as something that was, well, you guys really took a stand. No, you broke into a place where you weren't welcome. This is not a public place. It was a place where you really should have had permission, but we went in and did it anyway. We got kicked out. Now, that's not a good testimony. I've seen some former Hyles-Anderson students that I knew in college thrown into jail for some of the shenanigans that they would do. So that's not being bold for Christ. It's being just plain stupid. It's being uncivil. It is not showing the right propriety in situations. We need to do that. If you're in a funeral, it's one thing. If you're out in a street corner preaching, it's another. But there seems to be a lack of discernment. And that is a mark that I think is just typical in this group. I'd like to maybe point out a few other things as he goes on, and then we'll close the video.
That I grew up with. As an elementary student, I helped her in her pre-K class as part of my extracurriculars. I helped her in her class with her students. I read to her students. I had dinner with this woman. I cared about this woman. I loved this woman. And this man wants to sit there and tell me to my face that he's a Calvinist preacher and he's sitting there teaching all these people Calvinism. And it's just one little Baptist church in Franklinton, Louisiana, in Clifton, out in the middle of nowhere. The least that you can do is get salvation right. The least you can do is preach to these people so that they know that they're on their way to heaven without doubt in their mind. But instead, you want to serve your own belly, and you want to lead these people astray and lead them to hell to serve yourself. The first and foremost audience that I have for this sermon is the congregation of Faith Baptist Church here. I want you all to learn about this heretical teaching of Calvinism. And secondly, is the congregation at Clifton Baptist Church in Clifton, Louisiana. The people there know where it is. If you go in Frankton, it's a left at the fairgrounds and you go straight. You'll find the church. It's on the right. It's pastored by Anthony Hicks, the false prophet, the false Calvinist teacher there of that church. And what makes me even more angry is that I always heard about this church growing up. I have so many people that I care about and love and grew up with that go to this church, and that's why I want these people that are listening in Franklinton, Louisiana to understand that this man is teaching damnable heresies, and he does not care if you go to heaven. He does not love you. He wants you to go to hell to serve his own belly, his own lusts.
I think this video pretty much speaks for itself, that the new IFB and some in the old IFB, especially the Hiles branch, feel that they alone are the sole owners of truth, that if you really want the truth, you must go to them and them alone. If you go to anybody outside of the new IFB, you're not going to get truth. This is a cultic mindset that this preacher, because he does not hold to the doctrine of election as they think that he should hold to, or the doctrine of depravity, or the doctrine of the inability of man, that this man then therefore is condemned. He doesn't believe in free will or whatever, to condemn this man as a cultist, whereas I think the evidence shows rather that this particular group, this man, are theologically deficient, they are theologically ignorant, historically ignorant, and if you're involved in a group like this, you need to get out. The drama that you see in these groups, the personal attacks that constantly go on, the ignorant attacks, they attack things which they do not understand, which is a mark of a cult. This man quotes this in his message, 2 Peter, I believe, chapter 2, I think. It describes false teachers. These people, if you were to go through that, you'd see that they're bold in their preaching, but they completely misunderstand what they're trying to preach about. They don't understand Calvinism. They don't understand anything other than their own little group. So as I mentioned before, hopefully we'll be able to get to interview this other pastor, or at least get to talk to him. I like to hear his side of the story. But here we have just one more illustration of the nonsense which comes out of this group, and it's something that you need to be aware of and you need to avoid, and to find a biblical church. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section. May the Lord bless you in your search for truth.